Are the Dallas Cowboys getting ready to name Cooper Beebe the starting center? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting the way we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are going to answer your Twitter questions, including which veterans could the Cowboys potentially trade away? Should the Cowboys be looking at more defensive tackle depth? But we also wanted to mention that on tomorrow's show, we're going to be covering the Cowboys and Rams scrimmage that is taking place on Wednesday. That episode will be released on Thursday, so make sure you tune in for that. But Landon, we got some interesting news out of Mike McCarthy on Tuesday. He announced that Cooper Beebe, the Cowboys' third-round pick from Kansas State, is going to take first-team reps at center this week. What were just your initial reactions when you heard that news?
I mean, I think it's a great step, right? Like I've been pretty clear that I feel like Hoffman has been the better center so far here in camp. But you know, the sands are going to shift here as we're standing. You know, these guys are going to continue to improve, especially these young guys, right? They're going to continue to get better. And Cooper Beebe had a good week of practice. He played well in the game. I still feel like he played better at guard than he did at center, but I also still think that at this point, he needs snaps. He literally and figuratively, he needs to take some snaps. And I think, to kind of chart his progression a little bit, right? I think early on it was a little bit of kind of all over the place snaps. I mean, it wasn't so bad like he was constantly snapping over people's heads, but they were inconsistent, which is not uncommon for a guy who's hasn't played center and is playing it more often. And then the other aspect that we were kind of concerned about and tracking was that post snap transition to being a blocker, right? Like getting his hands up, getting his hand placement correctly, and really his issue I felt like was rushing too much after the post snap. It's not that he wasn't fast enough. It was that he was going too fast and not being precise. And then eventually getting out over his skis and leaning out. I think that has gotten better. And I think that is something that has improved and progressed a little bit. I still think as we stand currently, if there was a game tomorrow, I would probably feel more comfortable with Hoffman than Beebe as a starter. But I think the fact that McCarthy has mentioned this, the fact that they are starting to rotate him in with the first team more, means that we are getting closer and closer to crossing that Rubicon of when Cooper Beebe will become the better of the two players. And the fact that the Cowboys are willing to start kind of hand feeding him some of these snaps, I think maybe is a sign that Solari is kind of getting used to this idea a little bit more and getting ready to think that, okay, this guy has started to earn some of these snaps. He's playing with a little bit more consistency. Maybe we can trust him to start taking over this role a little bit. And maybe they started to move up the trajectory of when Beebe's going to be able to take over that starting role.
They probably also want to see what Cooper Beebe looks like with a starting offense in a preseason game. And I've got a feeling, again, who knows, but I've got a feeling that Beebe's going to start this week against the Raiders on Saturday night. And it's not a bad matchup to go to see how Beebe's going to play, because they've got Christian Wilkins, who is one of the best defensive tackles in the league. They've got a couple other massive nose tackles, including John Jenkins, who is like 375 pounds. So maybe they just want to see him against some different types of defensive tackles to see how he performs. And, he just needs the reps. I don't think Brock Hoffman needs the reps as much as what Beebe does. So maybe you just try to get him 30, 40 more reps at center and see how it goes.
Yeah, let's not read too much into this yet. This is not Mike McCarthy saying that Cooper Beebe is the new starting center, right? This is still an evaluation period, right? This is still determining whether or not this player is at a spot where, he's in striking distance to potentially taking that starting job. So let's keep it in place. But I completely agree with your points. Like, I mean, I think that this is a great opportunity for getting a good eval on BB. I think the Cowboys have a good idea of where Hoffman is and who Hoffman is as a player. And so I think you have to. I think it's good to give him snaps at guard, and I think he had a lot of good snaps there. But if you're going to give him the opportunity to try to take this job as we get closer and closer to week 1 of the regular season, he needs more and more snaps at the spot. He needs to play the position at a high level in order to see if he's capable of handling that transition at that level. I think he's moved past some of the initial bumps and bruises of transitioning from guard to center. And now it's kind of time to throw him in the deep end a little bit more and see, hey, look, you seem to have slowed your process down now. Let's keep your process slow against, starting level defenders and borderline Pro Bowlers at interior, and if you're still keeping your techniques, still playing within yourself, then now we can start having a real competition with Brock Hoffman for that starting center position for week 1.
And you and I are very optimistic about Cooper Beebe, so we just should say that out front. But there's also a chance, and I think this is pretty unlikely, but maybe they just want to see Cooper Beebe start a full week of practice, play a game, and then see, okay, hey, he's not ready to be a center. We need to keep a backup center on the roster that's not Cooper Beebe. Maybe it's Dakota Shepley, right? And then we'll just keep Beebe as our backup guard, right? That we can play at left guard, right guard. Again, that's probably on the lower end of outcomes, but I do think it's all in the spectrum of what could happen. I think this is a good time to roll it out, give him a full week to practice and see how it goes in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. He's earned an opportunity to kind of see, hey, you ready to take another step? You ready to see if you can do this? If not, it's not the end of his career or the end of the world. It just means that we need to kind of adjust the trajectory, because at a certain point you run out of runway, right? Like there's training camp's going to break here in about a week and a half. You start prepping for at least at Oxnard, sorry. And then you start prepping for, your regular season stuff. And at that point, it's not that the competition is over, but I think the adjustments that are going to be made for week 1 kind of get put on hold. And that certainly doesn't mean that if it doesn't happen for BB before week 1, that he can't take that job, a couple weeks into the regular season. But I do think that they want to get to a soft landing spot at a certain point and go, okay, like this competition is either heating up, we're going to make a decision in the next week, or let's call it, let's plateau this for a little bit. We'll maybe revisit it a couple of weeks into the season.
So again, we have 3 weeks until the regular season begins, maybe just over 3 weeks. Who do you believe is he starting week 1 center against Cleveland?
I think that the fact that BB is getting this opportunity now is a good sign, right? I would have yesterday or the day before have told you that Hoffman to me felt like my choice for who would start week 1 at center. I will say now that not that BB has caught Hoffman or that he, I'm not calling anything. I think it's just now more of a 50-50 call than it was even yesterday, just because I think this is showing part of the barrier to Cooper Beebe being a starter at week 1 is the Cowboys' willingness to throw him out there week 1. So I think this, to me, shows a willingness that they're trying to potentially get him ready to be a starter week 1, which I think improves his chances to being a starter week 1.
I still think it's going to be Brock Hoffman early in the season. I've got some concerns that Mike McCarthy and Mike Solari, which just don't want to start 2 rookies early in the season.
And that's fair,
I think Guyton,
defensive line.
Guyton is going to start, right? Like they almost have no choice, right? But if they could maybe ease Cooper Beebe into this, and that way they're not having to play 2 rookies that they're trying to hide. And I'm not saying that they have to completely hide those guys, but I just won't be surprised if it's Hoffman for the first 3 games, and then we see some rotating, and then all of a sudden by week 6, it's Cooper Beebe at center. I won't be surprised if that's how it plays out either.
That's the trajectory I think we've seen up until this point. So if this, him getting snaps with the first team changes that trajectory, maybe the new trajectory is a starter Cooper Beebe week 1. But if it doesn't, I think if they continue on what they've been doing the previous weeks, then I think you're right that Brock Hoffman will likely end up being the starter for week 1.
All right, let's get to some more questions, including, do the Cowboys need to go out and trade for more interior defensive line depth? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But with the playoffs winding down, we just have fewer and fewer games to watch. And the sports aren't sporting the way we'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You can go bet, of course, on any Major League Baseball games. We have baseball games all summer long. We've got some preseason games this weekend. The NFL is just around the corner, so get those future bets in. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your leagues this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Landon, this next question comes from Jake, and he said, I'm excited about this Cowboys defense, ? It's not really a question, but he wants to know, are there teams around the league we should be paying attention to with potential excess at the defensive line? I wrote down a couple names. If you're a draft fan, you might remember some of these names. Siaki Ika, who was a third-round pick from the Browns, is buried on the depth chart there. Wouldn't be surprised if he's cut. Liki Fotu, who was a big defensive tackle from Utah, he is buried on the Jets defensive line. Don't think he's going to make that roster. But one of the things that I did, Landon, when I was just looking at these rosters of all the defensive tackles, there's just not a lot of depth across the league. It's one of the few positions where most teams will have one starter and maybe one solid backup, but there's just not a lot of depth across the league.
It's a planet player, man. It's, there's just not a lot of humans that are that size, that are that athletic at either 6'1", 300 pounds or 6'4", 330 pounds, whatever body type you need for defensive tackle. There just aren't a lot of those kind of athletes in the world. So, I agree. I think that you could always use more bodies at that position, but there's usually not enough. I think that the thing that has made me kind of more interested in discussing defensive tackle depth is actually the injury to Sam Williams, because as Sam Williams got injured, it became clear, and now I think we've had this confirmed yesterday from Mike Zimmer, that the plan to replace Williams a lot includes obviously Nealand and him getting more snaps, but also the kind of dual guys like Golston and Fajoku are going to end up be playing more outside, right?
Can we talk about those guys really quickly?
Yeah, please.
Those are two players that we didn't talk about at all in the preseason game.
Yes.
Golston was playing a lot as a base end.
Yeah.
And I liked the work I saw from him in the run game. I thought he did a good job. There was a play that I really liked where he stacked a tight end and then threw him aside and made a tackle behind the line of scrimmage. Like that's
his expertise, honestly, like as far as taking on tight ends, he's really good at that.
No, he just doesn't really give you anything as a pass rusher because he just doesn't have that athleticism.
No.
But inside as a interior rusher, he gives you some juice that way.
Yes.
But he can't hold up against the run, which makes him a very frustrating player.
Well, yeah, especially since he's not great against the run on the outside against tackles either. It's kind of a 50-50 proposition. So I agree. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. And then Junior Fajoku, he might be a little bit of a gamer. I thought he played pretty well in the Rams one, but even then, still, my biggest concern for this Cowboys defense isn't actually the run defense. It's who is going to bring the juice as a pass rusher outside of Micah Parsons, because I don't see it.
Well, I think the answer is the blitz, and I think that's the good news. Is that I think the issue here too is just to kind of touch on those two guys, right? I think we talked about Golston. That's who Golston has been. Is I like him as an interior pass rusher. I like him as a run defender taking on tight ends. I don't like him as an interior run defender. I don't like him as a run defender taking on tackles. And for Fajoku, like he literally had to move out to defensive end because the dude cannot play tackle. We've seen it. It's not working. Like Fajoku basically had to move out to defensive end because he was not going to make anything as a defensive tackle. So anyways, all of that is to say that those guys moving to more of an outside role And that's what we're going to see is more Golson outside, which is fine, and more Fehoko outside, which is nah. But that kind of takes away all the interior depth that you have, right? Really outside at 3 technique. That's really where the concern is at this point. I think you've seen some stuff from Mozzie where you feel like we can get him there. I think that Carl Davis has shown you enough on limited snaps that between him, Mozzie, and I like Justin Rogers a lot, that between the 3 of them, you can get something in that middle. Where I have concerns is where are you going to get your snaps at 3 technique? Where are you going to get your pass rushing tackle snaps? And maybe part of this is to kind of schematically rearrange it so you're just not leveraging a pass rush under tackle as much when you don't have Osa on the field, or enough that you can get by with just having Osa and then Golson potentially filling those roles. But if not, I think you probably need to go out and get a 3 technique more than a nose tackle, because that's where you're going to be missing the most snaps. And if something happened to Osa, you would really be in trouble. Like, because you would basically have no juice in the middle outside of Golson whenever he's down there.
And that was going to be my point. If you were to rank like the top 10 players in this Cowboys roster, there's a good chance that Osa is either like 10 or off the list. But if you were to rank like the top 10 players you can't afford to lose, he is 100% on this list, because there is no backup for him on this team that you feel good about at all. In fact, who is even his backup? Like if Osa just decided to miss practice today, who's filling in for him?
I mean, I would imagine that Golson would get the majority of his snaps, and that they would play with more big bodied, more kind of tight front stuff, right? Where you've got 2 bigger bodies that are playing kind of a 2-eye as opposed to a 1 and a 3. So I mean, I think that the solution would be not just a simple 1-for-1 swap as a player. I think you're making schematic changes in order to facilitate not having Odighizuwa if something were to happen to him.
So back to the listener's question, I don't know if you're going to get the value in a trade at defensive tackle, but you might be able to find an edge that can come in and be like your 4th edge that allows you to maybe play Golson a little bit more inside if you need that. I think that's probably the way to go. And we could discuss names at another time, but I think there's just more edge depth across the league than there are interior defensive tackles. And it's why those guys get paid so much. Even an average player will get 12, 13 million a year, because there's just not many guys with that size and athleticism and strength.
Well, and I'll point out that I thought Muhammad AQM had a decent game against the Rams. I also think that, again, I would not at all be shocked we get through all this training camp and Carl Lawson still ends up on this team, right? Like, because they still have 2 nice veteran defensive ends available on the market that haven't been signed yet, one of which has a history with Mike Zimmer. So there certainly is opportunity if you wanted to kind of go out there and get a defensive end to try to slide Golston back inside. But I mean, you tell me if you feel, but that, to me, even that feels still like
it's not enough.
Not a solution to necessarily.
It's better.
I think, it's better because it gives you more snaps at the position with a quality player, but it's not quite the same as going out and getting a quality defensive tackle, rotational backup, which, as you said, frankly, don't exist very much in the NFL. It's just not, a position that there is a bunch of inventory for.
Well, it's why I keep coming back to, I wonder what the Cowboys are going to do with this Osa contract. He's set to be a free agent after the year. And it's probably why they need to start getting the ball rolling with some of these other contracts so they can figure out if they have room to sign Osa. Because if Osa leaves as a free agent next year, you could write it down in pen right now that their first pick is going to be a defensive tackle, because they have literally no depth at all. And they just wouldn't have a starting caliber 3 technique on this roster whatsoever.
Yeah, and this is Golson's last year too, right? So you
would believe we're already at the end of this part, right?
Yeah, that's so nuts. Yeah,
I know, it's crazy. All right, let's talk about what players the Cowboys could potentially trade if they are searching for maybe defensive line help, maybe a running back, whatever position. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day. Maybe you never skip your morning walk. Or maybe you just never skip therapy day. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's sometimes hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy or going for a walk are more important than ever before. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch your therapist at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day on Thursday's show, we will break down the scrimmage between the Cowboys and Rams. Just before we jumped on the show, Mike McCarthy said the first team was going to get extensive run in the practice, so we will make sure we cover that for you. So tune in for that tomorrow. But let's finish up here, Layden. And we got this one from several different people. What players could the Cowboys potentially trade away? Which veterans could they move to potentially either get another draft pick or trade for another veteran?
Yeah, like let's extrapolate out a little bit of our early conversation in the first segment, right? Let's say Beebe, takes the brass ring and runs with it, right? Or at the very least shows you a level of competence that you feel like, all right, maybe he's not ready to be the starter quite week one, but he showed us that he can at the very least be the swing backup on his way to being the starter, right? If that's the case, I think suddenly you have a dearth at offensive line, to be honest, right? Because you still have Nathan Thomas. You still got a couple of these other guys. I think they like Dakota Shipley a little bit as a down roster potential practice squad guy that they could call up as needed. So you do have an extra spot for a guy that if you wanted to see if you could get something for TJ Bass, who I think could be a starter in this league. And I think that you could potentially, if guys have watched his tape last year, if they watched his tape in training camp, I think you could potentially offer him up to a team that is in need right now for something significant. Offensive line help, especially quality offensive line help that's cheap, is really, really hard to come by. So it's a valuable piece that's worth trading. So I think TJ Bass to me seems like a guy that potentially could be someone that's on the move if things kind of continue to progress the way that we've talked about specifically in the first segment.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bass. I think Bass is the name that you could potentially trade because he still has, I think, 3 years left on his rookie contract, right? He was a big time recruit, and we saw him play last year. Now, you're not going to be getting a high pick for him or anything like that. You would probably be getting. You and I were talking pre-show, like Khalil Herbert from the Bears, their third running back. I think that would probably be close in terms of value, right? If Chicago wanted more depth in the offensive line, they know Herbert's not one of their top 2 running backs. I think a trade like that would be somewhat fair, right?
Yeah.
Another name I wanted to mention just on the offensive line that we have not talked about yet. Do you know who the highest graded offensive lineman for the preseason was in week 1?
It's everybody's favorite offensive lineman, Josh Ball, if I'm not mistaken.
He played 40 snaps. Had a 90.7 grade, a 91.7 run block grade, allowed 1 pressure on 28 pass blocking snaps. Listen, you and I are not huge Josh Ball fans. However, somebody in that coaching staff is because they just continue to give him chances over and over. If the Cowboys traded somebody like TJ Bass, could that potentially open up a spot for Josh Ball to get that final offensive line spot?
It certainly gives him the opportunity. I think, and as we've seen, I think it's, going back and watching the tape of the game, that right side really had some problems. And I hate to say this, earmuffs, Marcus, but I think it was more Willetsko than
Willetsko was terrible.
So I tend to think that, obviously, look, we don't love the history there with Ball and the off-field stuff that happened at Florida State. Obviously, that's separate. But as a player, he wasn't very good last year either, so it made it easier. I think this year you've seen an improvement. I think he is a more natural player at guard than he was last year. And I think he has strength. He has power. And that's the advantage.
And he's got some edge to him
Yeah, for
And
sure.
this is hard. It's a hard conversation to have, but he has some edge to him that Mike Solari likes, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I don't think there's a spot on the active roster right now, but if you do move somebody like TJ Bass, that's when I think maybe we could see Josh Ball sneak onto this roster.
Yeah, and I wouldn't actually be shocked if they did if they started to like Josh Ball and he started to practice well and could kind of carry over some of the stuff from the game. I wouldn't be shocked if they also started cross training him at right tackle a little bit. See if they
I
can
wouldn't
get
be
a
surprised.
similar situation that they have with Awesome Richards on the left side, right, where you've got a guy who can give you a full side of backup. So, yeah, I mean, because he has history at tackle, right? So,
Right.
yeah, I think it is interesting to see, that Ball potentially would be the benefactor of that whole situation. But I also think that it also opens up the opportunity for a guy like Nathan Thomas if he's able to come back and
Sure.
kind of really show you something as well. So there's lots of these guys. I mean,
Yeah.
the Cowboys clearly have depth at this spot, and the fact that they have a player that they're willing to trade at a interior offensive line position and also have several other guys underneath that player that you're excited about the opportunity that
Yep.
they would get after the trade, I think shows you where the Cowboys offensive line depth is right now.
One last position I just wanted to mention. Safety is interesting
Yep.
because we're just going to see a lot fewer 3 safety looks than we saw last
Mhm.
year. But I think they have 4 quality safeties with
Yes.
Malik Hooker, Donovan Wilson, Marquise Bell, and Wanye Thomas. Now, maybe they just keep Marquise Bell and Wanye Thomas with the idea that those guys could be starters in 2025. But if a team really needed a safety, maybe they would come around and look at Malik Hooker and Wanye Thomas, or Donovan Wilson. The hard part about this is there's still so many free agent safeties available, like
Yeah.
Justin
Just
Simmons.
Justin Simmons is still out there, for goodness
That's
sake.
why
Like,
it gets really hard to like trade one of these guys. I don't know if I see that happening either.
yeah, it feels like the league has made a concerted effort to try to devalue the position.
Yeah.
It is kind of a fascinating study. Somebody should really do a deep dive specifically in the free agent safety
Yeah.
market because there's something there, I feel like. But yeah, I mean, I think to your point, when a top 3 safety is available on the market, this late into training camp, it really is likely to depress the safety market. So I would
That's why I
imagine.
think it would have to be like a Wanye Thomas. Again, I don't think they would want to trade Wanye, but like a
No.
Wanye Thomas on a rookie contract for a different player on a rookie contract that's buried and not playing. Like if you're going to trade, it would have to be something like that.
Or like someone who's in a contract year or something like that, and they know that they're not going to re-sign because it's going to be too much money, and they're just looking to, get some sort of future deal for it. Like they'll
Yeah.
flop that player. Yeah, I mean certainly, or the possibility that the truth is that injuries happen, and
Yep.
and the market likely will be a little bit more palatable for a safety trade week 2 or week 3.
Probably.
So there's a possibility that the safety market just isn't great right now, and that trade may happen. It just may need to happen a little bit closer to the deadline.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Now go listen to Locked On Fantasy for your second listen. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your league this season. You can find the link to the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast in the description of this podcast, so you don't even need to go search for it. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go follow the Locked On Cowboys podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. You can follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.